There is a plant growing in your backyard right now that contains more protein than quinoa, more iron than spinach, more vitamin C than oranges. Indigenous tribes across 4 continents called it the life giver. They planted it in their most sacred gardens. They ground its seeds into bread that sustained entire communities through brutal winters. For over 8,000 years, this plant fed more humans than wheat and corn combined. It grew without irrigation, without fertilizer, without permission. Then, in 1947, everything changed. The same agricultural departments that had recommended this plant for victory gardens during World War II suddenly classified it as one of the world's most problematic weeds. Universities that had taught families how to grow it began publishing eradication guides. Chemical companies developed herbicides specifically engineered to destroy it. Today, farmers spray millions of acres each year to kill what their great-grandparents cultivated as food. They convinced you it was worthless. They told you it was a pest. They spent billions making sure you would never remember what it could do. But they lied. This plant still grows in every climate on Earth. It still produces more nutrition per square foot than anything in your grocery store. It still remembers how to save lives. The question is not whether this plant works. The question is why they wanted you to forget. Welcome to Clean Eating Forgotten. The archive opens along the Mississippi River in the year 700. Picture a city larger than London at that time. Cahokia, the greatest urban center north of Mexico. 40,000 people living in a complex of mounds and plazas that stretched for 6 square miles. Archaeologists excavating beneath the ancient city made a discovery that rewrote everything we thought we knew about Native American agriculture. In storage pits dug deep into the earth, they found thousands of charred seeds. Not corn, not beans, not squash. Seeds from a plant that modern scientists had dismissed as a common weed. Carbon dating revealed something impossible. These seeds had been deliberately stored, processed, and cultivated for over 1,300 years. The people of Cahokia had been growing this plant in massive quantities, grinding the seeds into flour, using it as their primary grain crop centuries before corn arrived from Mexico. This was not supplemental food. This was civilization. Travel west to the Great Plains. The Lakota called this plant Wape Makoskin. The words translate to bear spinach. They watch the great bears emerge from hibernation each spring and eat these leaves first before anything else. The bears knew something. The Cherokee called it saladihi. The Hopi knew it as como, sacred food. The Haudenosaunee revered it as the companion of the 3 sisters. Across the continent, over 200 tribes cultivated the same plant. Not by accident, by design. This is lamb's quarters. Chenopodium album, the same family that gave us quinoa. But this species has been feeding humans longer than any other cultivated plant except wild rice. Picture an autumn day in the northern plains, around 1600. Women from a Mandan village wade through fields of shoulder-high plants, their seed heads heavy and silver in the morning light. They beat the mature stalks with wooden paddles, catching the seeds in woven baskets. The seeds fall like rain, black and shiny, thousands from a single plant. Back in the village, the seeds are spread on hides to dry in the sun. The smell is earthy, slightly sweet, like fresh-cut hay mixed with something ancient. Children help winnow the seeds, tossing them into the wind, while elders catch the heavy grains in clay bowls. The chaff floats away. The food remains. These seeds will be ground into flour on stone metates worn smooth by generations of hands. Mixed with cornmeal. Formed into cakes. Baked over open fires. The taste is nutty, substantial, filling in a way that satisfies something deep in the body. The leaves are eaten fresh in summer, their texture smooth and tender, their flavor like spinach but milder, with an undertone of mineral and earth. In winter, the dried leaves are reconstituted in stews, adding nutrients when fresh food is scarce. When Lewis and Clark crossed the continent in 1805, they recorded that native women gathered lamb's quarters seeds by the thousands of pounds each autumn. Entire communities survived winter on these stores. Travel across the ocean to medieval Europe. In the Scottish Highlands, peasant families knew this plant by another name: fat hen. They cultivated it in cottage gardens when grain prices rose beyond reach. During the Irish potato famine of 1845, entire villages survived by gathering wild lamb's quarters when everything else failed. The blight destroyed potatoes. The landlords exported wheat. But the weed that grew in ditches and along stone walls kept families alive through the darkest winters. They called it the famine plant. Not because it caused hunger, because it ended it. In Scandinavia, they called it melda. Viking settlements across the North Atlantic relied on it during the long winters when nothing else would grow. Archaeological sites in Greenland, abandoned for 500 years, still contain carbonized lamb's quarter seeds in storage vessels. The plant followed humans everywhere they went. Or perhaps humans followed the plant. In China, it was hui kai, a vegetable cultivated for over 3,000 years. The leaves appear in medical texts from the Han Dynasty as a remedy for inflammation and digestive ailments. Traditional healers prescribed it for conditions we would now call arthritis and ulcers. In India, batua greens have been part of traditional cuisine for millennia. Village markets still sell them fresh each morning, though fewer people remember why they matter. Grandmothers in rural Punjab still insist their grandchildren eat batua at least once a week during winter. They cannot explain the science. They know the wisdom. In Ukraine, during the Holodomor of 1932, when Stalin's policies starved millions, villagers called this plant lebeda, the lifesaver. It grew in the margins between collectivized fields, too small to notice, too resilient to kill. It kept children alive when everything else was confiscated. The same plant, different continents, different names, different famines. The same reverence. Modern science would later confirm what these cultures knew intuitively. In 1998, researchers at the University of Vermont published a comprehensive nutritional analysis. The methodology was rigorous. The samples were gathered from 12 different growing regions. The results were tested and retested. The findings seemed impossible. Per 100 grams of edible leaves, lamb's quarters contains 309 milligrams of calcium. That is more than milk. It contains 11 milligrams of iron. That is more than beef liver. It contains 80 milligrams of vitamin C. That is more than oranges. The vitamin A content reaches over 11,000 international units. That is 6 times more than spinach. The protein content exceeds 4 grams per serving, with a complete amino acid profile. All 9 essential amino acids that humans cannot produce on their own. A study published in the Journal of Food Science in 2004 confirmed these findings and added more. The omega-3 fatty acid content rivals flax seeds. The antioxidant profile includes beta-cyanins, the same compounds that make beets red and have shown promise in cancer prevention research. Research published in 2016 in the Journal of Ethnopharmacology examined the traditional medicinal uses. The findings validated what healers across cultures had known for centuries. Compounds in the leaves demonstrated anti-inflammatory properties. Extracts showed antimicrobial activity. The plant that grandmothers prescribed for upset stomachs actually works. But here is what made scientists pause. Lamb's quarters produces these nutrition levels without fertilizer, without pesticides, without irrigation, without any of the inputs that modern agriculture considers essential. Research teams in Nebraska measured yields of wild lamb's quarters at over 2 tons per acre. Wild plants, no cultivation, no management, just seeds dropped by birds and wind growing in abandoned fields. Compare that to commercial spinach, which averages 1.5 tons per acre with intensive management. Fertilizer applications, irrigation systems, pest control, labor costs. The wild weed outproduced the commercial crop by 30% while requiring nothing. A 2012 study in agricultural systems analyzed the resource efficiency. The results challenged everything modern farming assumes. Lamb's quarters produced more nutrition per acre, per gallon of water and per dollar invested than any commercial leafy green. The researchers noted something else. The plant actually improves soil quality. Its deep taproot breaks up compacted earth. Its fallen leaves add organic matter. Fields where lamb's quarters grows show increased fertility the following season. It is not competing with crops. It is preparing the ground for them. A 2019 analysis went further. Researchers compared the environmental footprint of wild harvested lamb's quarters to commercially grown spinach. The results were not close. Commercial spinach requires an average of 23 gallons of water per pound of edible produce. Lamb's quarters requires 0 irrigation and still produces more yield. The carbon footprint of commercial greens includes transportation, refrigeration, packaging, and retail waste. Wild plants have none of these costs. The most sustainable food is the food that grows itself. So, if lamb's quarters is more nutritious than spinach, more productive than commercial greens, and easier to grow than anything else, why is it not in every grocery store? Why do farmers not cultivate it commercially? Why do agricultural departments still classify it as a noxious weed? The answer has nothing to do with nutrition. The answer has nothing to do with taste or yield or food security. The answer is economic. World War II changed everything about food in America. During the war, Victory Garden manuals published by the United States Department of Agriculture recommended lamb's quarters as an essential crop. The 1943 edition called it superior to spinach in every nutritional category. Government pamphlets taught families how to cultivate it, harvest it, and preserve it. Rationing made wild foods patriotic. Growing your own was supporting the troops. Then the war ended. Chemical companies that had been manufacturing explosives needed new markets. Factories that had produced munitions for the battlefields of Europe sat idle. Shareholders demanded returns. The answer was agricultural chemicals, DDT, 2,4-D, herbicides that could kill anything green. But they had a problem. How do you sell poison to farmers who have been growing food without chemicals for 8,000 years? How do you convince people to buy products they do not need? You change what they believe they need. The same plant the government had promoted in 1943 became classified as a serious agricultural weed by 1950. The transition took less than 7 years. The same universities that had published cultivation guides began publishing eradication manuals. This was not conspiracy. This was business. The strategy was methodical. First, redefine the language. Any plant growing without human permission became a weed by definition. The word itself became a weapon, not a biological classification, a marketing term. Second, fund the research. Chemical companies donated generously to agricultural extension programs. The scientists who received funding published papers confirming that weeds reduced crop yields. They did not study whether those weeds were edible. That question was not asked. Third, educate the educators. A generation of agricultural students learned that modern farming required chemical inputs. The old ways were primitive. The new ways were scientific. Progress meant purchasing products. Fourth, reach the consumers. Advertisements showed pristine lawns free of dandelions. Magazine articles praised the convenience of processed foods. The message was consistent. Wild plants were dirty. Packaged foods were clean. The herbicide industry today generates over $40 billion annually. That is billion with a B. $40,000 million. Every single year. Much of that profit comes from killing plants that are more nutritious than anything farmers cultivate commercially. Lamb's quarters. Amaranth, purslane, plantain, dandelion. The economics are simple. You cannot patent 8,000 years of indigenous knowledge. You cannot create hybrid varieties that farmers must purchase annually. You cannot sell fertilizer for a crop that grows in poor soil. You cannot sell herbicides for a plant that outcompetes other weeds naturally. You cannot build recurring revenue from something that reseeds itself forever. The entire economic model of industrial agriculture depends on crops that require constant inputs: seeds, chemicals, equipment, expertise. Lamb's quarters requires none of that. Plant it once, it reseeds itself. Your grandchildren will still be harvesting from the same patch. That is not a product. That is a threat. By 1970, chemical companies had convinced farmers that any plant growing without permission was a weed by definition. The word weed itself became a weapon, not a biological classification, a marketing term. Lamb's quarters, a weed that must be killed. Amaranth, a weed that chokes crops. Purslane, a weed that invades gardens. These were the same plants that had sustained human civilization for millennia. Suddenly, they were enemies, requiring chemical warfare. The seed and chemical industry now generates over $100 billion annually in the United States alone. Their business model depends on you believing that food must be purchased, processed, and packaged. That nutrition comes from factories, not from the earth beside your door. If you knew that the most nutritious food on the planet was growing in your yard for free, you would stop buying their products. So they made sure you would not know. But knowledge does not die. It just goes underground. In Mexico, quintanilla, the local name for lamb's quarters, still appears in traditional markets. Vendors display bundles of fresh leaves beside tomatoes and peppers. Families sauté the greens with garlic and chili, the same way their ancestors did before the conquistadors arrived. In Greece, they call it vlita. Tavernas serve it simply, dressed with olive oil and fresh lemon. The old recipes survive in villages where grandmothers still remember. In China, hui kai appears in traditional medicine shops. The leaves are recommended for inflammation, for digestive troubles, for restoring balance to bodies worn down by modern food. Indigenous communities across North America never stopped knowing. They kept gathering seeds, kept cooking leaves, kept passing knowledge to their children despite centuries of suppression. The Navajo still harvested in the traditional way. The Pueblo peoples incorporated into seasonal ceremonies. The knowledge survived because people refused to forget. And now, something is shifting. Climate change is forcing a reckoning with industrial agriculture. Drought is killing wheat crops across the Great Plains. The Ogallala aquifer that irrigates the breadbasket of America is depleting faster than rainfall can replenish it. Heat waves are destroying corn yields in regions that once produced abundance. Farmers are facing the same conditions that made lamb's quarters essential for 8,000 years. Uncertain water, variable weather, the need for crops that can survive without constant intervention. Research stations across Africa are studying Chenopodium species for food security. The plant produces nutrition in conditions where other crops fail completely. Semi-arid regions, salty soils, places where climate change is hitting first and hardest. International agricultural organizations are quietly reconsidering what they dismissed as weeds. The same institutions that promoted chemical agriculture for decades are now publishing papers on resilient indigenous crops. The market is responding too. In 2023, sales of foraged greens at farmers markets increased 42% over the previous year. Urban farms in Detroit, Oakland, and Philadelphia are cultivating wild plants that their grandparents would have recognized. Restaurants with months-long waiting lists feature weeds on their tasting menus. Seed banks are preserving varieties of lamb's quarters that were nearly lost. Ethnobotanists are documenting traditional preparation methods before the last elders who remember them are gone. A quiet revolution is happening in backyards and community gardens across the country. Young farmers are rediscovering what industrial agriculture tried to erase. They are learning from elders who never forgot. They are planting what cannot be patented. The tide is turning, not because of the industry, despite them. Reclaiming this knowledge is surprisingly simple. Step 1. Learn to identify lamb's quarters with confidence. The leaves are diamond-shaped, sometimes with irregular teeth along the edges. Young leaves have a distinctive white powder underneath, like they have been dusted with flour. This coating washes off but helps with identification. The stems are often streaked with red or purple, especially near the base. The overall appearance is silvery green, different from most other plants in your garden. The seed heads form dense clusters at the top of the plant in late summer, looking like tiny green grapes that eventually turn black when mature. Find a field guide specific to your region. Cross-reference with online resources. Ask someone who knows. Positive identification is essential before eating any wild plant. Step 2. Harvest the young leaves from spring through fall. Pick leaves when they are tender, before the plant flowers. The youngest growth at the top of each stem is most tender. Avoid leaves that are yellowed, spotted, or past their prime. Taste a small amount first. The flavor should be mild, like spinach, but earthier, with a slight mineral quality. If it tastes bitter or unpleasant, you may have the wrong plant or leaves that are too old. Wash thoroughly. Wild plants can harbor dust, insects, or other contaminants. A good soak in cold water followed by a rinse removes most concerns. Step 3. Cook like you would spinach, but expect more. Sauté with garlic and olive oil. Add to soups in the last few minutes of cooking. Steam lightly and dress with lemon. Include in frittatas, quiches, or pasta dishes. The leaves cook down significantly, so harvest more than you think you need. A large basket of fresh leaves becomes a modest portion when cooked. The taste is subtle enough to blend with other ingredients, but distinct enough to notice. Your body will recognize the nutrition, even if your conscious mind does not. Step 4. Harvest seeds in late summer for year-round nutrition. Wait until the seed heads turn from green to black. The seeds should fall easily when you rub the clusters between your fingers. Beat the mature seed heads into a bucket or onto a clean sheet. Winnow by pouring seeds slowly between 2 containers while the wind carries away the chaff. Or use a fine mesh screen to separate seeds from debris. Store dried seeds in glass jars away from light and moisture. They remain viable for years. Decades, actually. Seeds found in archaeological sites have germinated after centuries. Grind seeds into flour using a blender, food processor, or grain mill. The flour adds nutrition to bread, pancakes, or any baked goods. Mix with wheat flour at first, then experiment with higher proportions. Or cook whole seeds like quinoa. Rinse first, then simmer in twice their volume of water until tender, about 15 minutes. The texture is similar to millet, nutty and slightly chewy. Step 5. Let one plant go to seed in your garden. Do not harvest everything. Allow at least one mature plant to complete its life cycle. It will drop 30,000 seeds. Most will germinate the following spring. You have just planted a permanent food source that requires nothing from you except restraint. Every year, thin the excess seedlings by eating them. The plants that remain will produce more than your family can consume. Step 6. Teach someone else what you have learned. Every person who recognizes lamb's quarters as food instead of a weed is one less customer for the $40 billion herbicide industry. Every garden that welcomes this plant is a small act of remembrance. Share the knowledge with your children, with your neighbors, with anyone who will listen. The chain of forgetting can be broken, one person at a time. Step 7. Question what else they told you to destroy. Lamb's quarters is not the only plant they reclassified. Dandelion, purslane, plantain, amaranth, chickweed, clover. Your yard is not a wasteland that needs chemical intervention. It is a grocery store that needs recognition. The story of lamb's quarters is not about one plant. It is about what happens when profit becomes more important than nutrition, when convenience replaces wisdom, when marketing overwrites memory. For 8,000 years, humans understood that the earth provides abundance without requiring destruction, that food does not need factories, that nutrition does not need patents. We traded that understanding for chemicals, for convenience, for an economic system that requires us to buy what the earth offers for free. The Lakota watched the bears eat these leaves first each spring, because the bears remembered something we forgot. The body knows what it needs. The earth knows how to provide it. This plant still grows everywhere humans live, in vacant lots, along fence lines, in the cracks of sidewalks, in the gardens we spray with poison. It is waiting. It has been waiting for 8,000 years. The $40 billion industry spent decades trying to make you forget. They classified abundance as a weed. They sold poison as progress. They convinced you that food comes from packages, not from the ground. But forgetting is not final. The knowledge your ancestors carried for 300 generations is still here, still encoded in the plants that refuse to disappear, still waiting for someone to remember. That someone could be you. The life giver is still growing, still offering, still remembering what we forgot. They called it a weed because they could not control it, because they could not patent it, because they could not profit from something that belongs to everyone. But that is exactly why we need it now. The choice is yours. If this archive opens something for you, subscribe and hit the bell. Every like and share helps preserve what they tried to erase. The next archive opens soon.